Hello everybody and welcome to what is probably going to be just about as ambitious as any video I will ever put out. Today we are here to talk about the Nemesis minions, and when I say we're talking about the Nemesis minions, I mean we are talking about all 55 of the minions that have been released thus far, all the way up to the Magneto pack. Yeah, this is going to be a long video, I can only imagine, and this is definitely going to be one where I'm going to time code everything. If you want to just look at the list and you know, compare and contrast and see what I have to say about all these, use how I got to the criteria I did, it's going to buckle up. So real quick, right before we get to everything, I just want to outline how or what criteria I was using to try to judge all these. And when I looked at these minions, when I looked at these Nemesis, I was using the criteria of how much does it fit the theme of the hero? Like, how much does it make sense within comic book lore? And then the other factor is how disruptive is this card to what the hero is trying to do? But that's all to do. Let's get into, dear Lord, number 55, Butler from the Deadpool pack. Obviously, my lowest rating, gave it on a 1 to 5 scale. Maybe I should have gone more than that now that I look at where we are at the top. But either way, 1 to 5 scale on flavor, I think it is a 2. He is a character that exists over the course of, I want to say, like 4 or 5 comics, and does have a meaningful connection to Wade in terms of the project that created him, but in my opinion is not a great. There's not a great connection. I don't know who else you would have necessarily picked. Oddly enough, Thanos might have been a valid thing. But then as I look at the card, a 2 scheme, 1 attack, 3 health minion that when it schemes, you place threat onto the side scheme that he brings into play, if able. Honestly, against Deadpool, that's not much of an inconvenience. That's why it gets a 1 in terms of disruption for me, giving it a grand total of, you know, when we add the scores together, when we multiply the 2 scores together, we get 2. I don't believe that he is this huge threat. I don't believe that he is necessarily the most thematic choice for the character. Thanos, like I said, probably would have been a wild swing for some people, but I think would have been more accurate. Although it would have been nice to see a comedic Thanos card, because I think it would have been one that didn't take the subject matter as seriously. Next up, we have my 54th placed Nemesis, Luminous, who I have no idea who this character is. And that's like another thing that I should say right up front is I don't have an entire encyclopedic knowledge about every single one of these characters. I have several copies of the Marvel Encyclopedia. It's a big coffee table book. I'm not going to sit here and dig through each one of them and try to find exactly how relevant is this person to this character. But to me, this character does not feel right for the Scarlet Witch. I realize that they want to portray Agatha Harkness as more of an ally, and for the most part, she's not nearly as villainous in the comics, in terms of my own memory, as she kind of comes off as in the MCU. Luminous is just not it for me. I think the problem with Luminous for me is that she's a character that who is this? I've never heard of this character before. And it'd be different, with my next pick we'll get to, where I've heard of them and I just disagree with them being the one. This is a character I've just never heard of, but I will say that in terms of how disruptive she is, so she gets a 1 for thematics. I think she gets a 3 for disruptiveness. She's a 2 scheme, 2 attack, 5 health minion that after Luminous activates against you, you discard the top card of the encounter deck. If 2 or more boost icons were discarded this way, deal yourself an encounter card. Especially with how Scarlet Witch can manipulate the number of boost icons are counted on something, you do have some defense against this, but the side scheme that comes into play also does boost the number of boost icons you're counting. Scarlet Witch already wants to manipulate the encounter deck. I think this manipulates the encounter deck in a way that is not favorable. And in fact, now that I'm saying all this, I do think that there is probably another video that will have to be made where I rank all of the side schemes in terms of, I guess, less flavor, although that might be a factor, but more of just how disruptive they are, and kind of give them a side scheme score as well. But that's a completely different thing. In talking about Luminous, I kind of brush her off only because yeah, at the end of the day, I feel like she's disruptive. She barely edges out Butler, but in my opinion, she's just not a character that I've really heard of, so I don't really get why this was Fantasy Flight's choice. And I'll even own up to the fact that I trust in Fantasy Flight that the choices they made are the best choices they maybe could have made at the time, especially, you know, what is relevant 2 years prior to the product coming out, a year prior to the product coming out. You know, you have to make these designs somehow, and sometimes you're just going to make decisions that are kind of so-so. Tied with Scarlet Witch, ironically, is Quicksilver at number 53. Avalanche I've heard of. I remember him from, well, one, I remember him in the comics. He's not a big deal, but he's a much bigger deal in X-Men Evolution, where I think I became the most aware of him. I think he's a very weird pick. I'll be honest, with Pietro and Wanda, I don't know who you necessarily pick to be their nemesis, but Avalanche just doesn't feel right. They're both part of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. I don't feel like they ever shared much screen or much page time, panel time in the comics where they are adversarial. Once Wanda and Pietro become Avengers, they, to my memory, I don't recall them really interacting with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants unless it was directly with Magneto. Now that said, very similar to Scarlet Witch, I will say that Avalanche can be disruptive, which does keep his score from being either tied with Deadpool or below Deadpool. I think as a 1 scheme 2 attack 4 health minion with Insight 2, where he's going to raise the threat on the main scheme, and then when revealed, each player must choose to either take 2 indirect damage or exhaust their identity. Looking at this from multiplayer or a solo perspective, both of those things are, I think, valid. Let's see, what was Quicksilver's health again? His base health was 9. So you are taking a reasonable, you're either going to exhaust Quicksilver, which is something that he doesn't like to do. He can easily ready, but the thing is, if you go into your player turn exhausted, I feel like overcoming that, you can't as easily ready, if I recall correctly. And to make this not become an extremely long video, I am going to go with my gut on some of this and try to not necessarily look at hero packs to be like, well, technically in their pack they have this. To my memory, 2 damage is a substantial amount of his life. That is 20% of his life, more than 20% of his life. So that is damage that you have to consider. Additionally, he does not love being exhausted. If he exhausts during his turn, he has an easy way right on the card to ready back up. But if he's exhausted going into his turn, that's pretty disruptive to him, which puts Avalanche at number 53. But our number 52 is Lady Deathstrike for X-23. They, as far as I know, they do share some time as quasi-team members in a more recent book that had to do with just like Weapon X characters. But in terms of like an antagonistic nature, they have like 1 fight during Messiah Complex. Now, I do believe that flavor is better than some of our previous choices, because you can actually see where the point was coming from. And I know on the winning hand, they pointed out that this entire basis may have been the creators read 1 comic book, and that was it. But I do see where they're coming from. I do think that Chimera would have been a better example, but I do think that Chimera leads into a world where you are factoring in body autonomy, which I think is probably a topic we don't need to get into in the game. That's maybe a little too much, and yeah, just a little too much. So Deathstrike gets a 2 for thematics. I think it's a 2 for disruptiveness. So she is 2 scheme, 2 attack, 5 health. When defeated, the player who defeated this minion discards the top card of the encounter deck and takes 1 indirect damage for each boost icon on the card. I think the most disruptive part about this card that sort of like edges it out is, 1, you're going to be taking some damage, but 2, while it is easy for X-23 to stream together 5 damage, I do think that it is enough of a speed bump to make her count for a reasonably disruptive. Ironically, not as disruptive as the previous 2, but I do think that when you combine her flavor with her disruptiveness, she sits handily at number 52, which ironically is still very low. Number 51, we are looking at Yellowjacket from the Ant-Man pack, which I think in terms of theme, this is kind of a home run. The Yellowjacket Ant-Man, Giant Man history is kind of blurred because at one point, Hank Pym himself, who was the original Ant-Man, also went by Yellowjacket. But at some point, the Yellowjacket moniker was kind of used by, you know, the enemy. And so this all makes sense. I think that in the comics where Scott Lang is the protagonist, I'm pretty sure he goes up against Yellowjacket. This all makes flavorful sense. I will say on the flip side, while it is cool, I think that in terms of how impactful he is on the game, how disruptive he is on the game, to scheme to attack for health minion. While you are in giant form, Yellowjacket gains the giant trait and retaliate 1. While you're in tiny form, Yellowjacket gains the tiny trait and gets +1 attack. I do not believe that this is that, like, that this is not that disruptive. Like the beginning of this list, I think that this is a flavor home run for me, but I think that it just, in terms of bringing the chocolate and the peanut butter together, I think this is just kind of in a middling status. Next up at number 50, we have Rocket Raccoon's nemesis, Blackjack O'Hare, who I will upfront say the Guardians of the Galaxy are kind of a hard group to judge, because while the Guardians of the Galaxy have existed since the 70s, this form of the Guardians of the Galaxy, one, was popularized by the movie, but really, if I'm remembering correctly, this version of the team sort of came into its own around like 2006. And while it frightens me to realize that that is 20 years ago, and that is a reasonable amount of the team's history, it's not half of it, but it's a reasonable amount. And Blackjack O'Hare has appeared in numerous comics involving Rocket Raccoon. I think thematically, he is strong. I mean, I gave him a 3 out of 5. I do think in terms of disruptiveness, he's just a quick strike, villainous minion with a 1 attack, 1 scheme, and 3 health. That's what's keeping him back. I think that when you take you got a raccoon and you got a rabbit, you know, just on the surface, that already seems like a good kind of like thematic match. I do think that he has appeared in enough comics of the Rocket Raccoon that you could associate the two of them together. I just feel like he is the least of your worries when it comes to playing Marvel Champions. And then we have number 49, Ironheart's nemesis, Lucia von Bardas. I have not read an Ironheart comic. I do not know who this character is. Like I said, I'm not going to try to make this into something that is overly encyclopedic, or else this video would go on forever. But in my mind, she is kind of on par with Lady Deathstrike for me. My understanding of the character is kind of the same thing. Like I just don't feel like that there's the same, like the two just don't match for me in terms of thematics. And then disruptiveness, let's see, I didn't have this one pulled up. Oh, there she is. Okay. Looking at my own screen here. So she is a 2 scheme, 1 attack, 4 health minion, while Lucia von Bardas has a tough status. She gets +1 scheme, +1 attack. After the villain phase ends, give her a tough status. If you get her as if you get her through Shadows of the Past, by the end of that, she's going to have a tough status. So she does take a little bit of work, but I've said this before in some of my pack reviews, kind of comparing the power level of the hero versus the power level of the Nemesis, or the power level of the Nemesis kit. In my mind, I think that Ironheart is like an 8 out of 10. That might be even a little excessive. I don't know where she sits kind of in the general community zeitgeist, but I feel like she is a strong 7 or 8 out of 10, and this is sort of a 5 or 6 out of 10 minion. She is powerful enough that this is not really a threat. She's not that disruptive in my mind. I feel like she just sort of comes up, like we are in the current tie for the next couple, where it's sort of going to be a flavor of 3, a disruptive of 2, and I just feel like when you take these two together, you do sort of get a flavor of 2, disruptive of 3. I don't feel like she's that disruptive. I think she's a speed bump, but she's not a big deal, which is why she, you know, for me, sits at number 49. Number 48, we've got War Machine with the Living Laser. This feels like a little bit of a weird pick to me, but I understand why they probably made it. My understanding in terms of the Iron Man side of the Marvel Universe is that Iron Man himself sort of had some problems with the, oh god, what are they called? The Lethal Legion. Living Laser is not necessarily a core member of that team. I think he's a part of like a very small team of Lethal Legion, but Iron Man has had enough problems with them that I understand why the Iron Man corner of the Marvel Universe is going to take a character like Living Laser, who has been part of, I think he's been part of the Masters of Evil. I know he's been a part of the Lethal Legion, at least in terms of maybe like a couple appearances. Just his general like feeling, like we've seen Living Laser before. I'm trying to think about what his other version is. Oh, it's just this version. Okay. I don't know why I was thinking that there was another version of the Living Laser. But to me, I would say that he is fine. I think for what War Machine is capable of, a 1 scheme 2 attack quick strike minion with piercing, which I don't recall if War Machine has a lot of tough, so that piercing is really a problem. But he does have quick strike, which does mean that he is going to probably get an attack in on you. He's not going to be a huge speed bump, but you are probably going to take some damage from him. If you happen to have a tough status, he's going to take it away pretty easily. But overall, I think he's kind of he's on the weaker side. And like I said, he came up with a 3 for flavor, 2 for disruptiveness. Next up, we have Yotat the Destroyer for Drax, and this is another example of when it comes to flavor. I feel like it's just with the Guardians of the Galaxy. I feel like it's just they're in space, so they get a 2. You've already checked off that box. They're, like they're not completely irrelevant, but you can understand why they are still in the same sphere. And to me, Yotat being 1 scheme 3 attack 5 health with guard and retaliate means that I do feel like he is disruptive enough to what Drax is trying to do to be relevant. And he's standing in the way with guard. He's standing in the way of you just going straight for the villain. And I think with 5 health, that shouldn't be a problem for Drax. I would think most Drax players would say that dealing 5 damage with Drax is not going to be a problem. But that's 5 damage. That's 5 damage is a good chunk. That's 5 damage that's not going towards the villain. And so for that, I do believe that he is at least disruptive enough to, kind of play fair. Staying on the same theme, number 46 is Star-Lord with Mr. Knife. Once again, pretty much the exact same reasoning here. We're in space, that all makes sense. Mr. Knife makes sense. I know he is a Brian Michael Bendis creation, so he's a recent creation in like the last 10-15 years. As just a retaliate minion with 6 health, I think that is... You probably will actually take some retaliate damage from this. The way that my memory remembers Star-Lord is that he can deal 4 damage, no problem, but 6 damage is not necessarily as easy as it might sound, which means that you're probably going to take at least 1 retaliate damage. You should be able to take Mr. Knife down in 2 attacks. But when the first treachery the engaged player reveals gains Surge, I do think that Star-Lord accumulates encounter cards enough so that I think this is going to affect Star-Lord every turn. And once you get into multiplayer, this is absolutely going to affect the player base every turn. You get into 2 or 3 other players plus Star-Lord monopolizing the amount of encounter cards, you're going to see treacheries. They are going to gain Surge. It's going to affect the game. So I do think that it is reasonably disruptive. And I'm actually realizing that we haven't even gotten close to a 4 out of 5 for disruptiveness. We've just kind of been languishing in 2s and 3s. So it's going to be interesting kind of getting into my head when I had to explain the more nuanced ones. This is my 45. Next up, we have Black Widow and Taskmaster. I think this was raised up by the Black Widow movie. I think that gave it more legitimacy, but I think that was just a reasonably well called shot. And if Taskmaster wasn't in that movie, it would have just been, well, okay, this is a good Hydra minion, And so it just kind of like works as a nemesis. Especially, I think what's important to also remember is I'm trying to, with the thematic, with the flavor part, really look at it as, if you are a player coming into this game, how logical is this going to appear to somebody? And I think that because people's idea, and granted, if you've watched the Black Widow movie, there's plenty of Marvel Champions players that probably didn't even watch that movie. But like, if that's how you know Taskmaster, then it makes sense. So I wanted to give it that extra point and say this was a 3 out of 5 in terms of thematics, because I do think that for millions of people, Scarlett Johansson, that Black Widow is the Black Widow that they know. There are going to be other generations of people. There's comic book readers that have their own idea of who Natasha is, but for a lot of people, that version of Black Widow is their Black Widow. So their Black Widow fought Taskmaster in her only movie. That's gonna mean something. So what does Taskmaster do? He is a 0 scheme, 0 attack, 4 health minion, and he gets +1 scheme, +1 attack for each upgrade you control. And once again, going off the top of my head, I'm fairly certain that a lot of what Natasha does, like all her preparations, are upgrades, they're not supports. So you are probably going to have a reasonable amount of upgrades in front of you. Hopefully your preparations are going to be able to kind of like just take care of Taskmaster immediately. But I think that he's not a 1 in disruption. Maybe he is a 3 in disruption. I put him at 2. I think that he is reasonably disruptive, but not terribly disruptive. After that, we get number 44, which is Iron Man with Whiplash. Once again, if you know nothing else, you know that Whiplash was in Iron Man 2. I do think that in terms of also just, once again, that Iron Man corner of the universe, I understand why this choice was made. I don't blame them for not putting the Mandarin here. I think the Mandarin is actually Iron Man's nemesis, but I think Whiplash is a good backup, which is why, combined with his disruptiveness, he does end up at 44. But all he is he's just a retaliate minion with decent amount of health. I think it's reasonable to say that Whiplash, on his basis, with no aspect in mind, I do think that the Whiplash is going to take 2 attacks from Iron Man to take down. So I do think you are going to get some of that retaliate damage, but I don't think it's that disruptive. He's just a body. He's not going to stop you from attacking the villain. And while he has 3 attack, so you don't want to just let him attack, I do think that he is not going to be a big worry. I don't think he's that disruptive. He is flavorfully mid, which, leaves him at number 44. Continuing on through the core set, we have number 43 with Captain Marvel and Yon Rogg. Once again, this makes a reasonable amount of sense. If I remember correctly, and maybe I'm wrong, this is the character from the movie. If memory serves me correctly, that wasn't much of a called shot, because with where they were going with Captain Marvel in the films, the Kree were going to be secret antagonists anyway. Hindsight says that the Skrulls and the Kree should have both been antagonists, and that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But Iron Man and Captain Marvel pretty much tie in terms of the relevance. I think what puts Yon Rogg a little bit above Whiplash is that he is going to be when he attacks, he is going to be placing threat on his side scheme, which I think makes him a little bit more nuanced of a disruptiveness, but there's no 2.5s in this scale, so we're just going to work with what we got. Next up, working through our list, we have number 42, which is SPDR and Morbius. My opinion is that this is a reasonably disruptive minion. Morbius gets a 2 in terms of flavor and thematics, because it comes from the world that Penny Parker comes from, but I believe is in all of one comic. Granted, Penny Parker's not in a lot of comics, but one comic. And so it gets you're in the right world, but I don't really know that there was going to be any strong nemesis for Penny Parker, but beyond fighting a kaiju kind of doesn't feel relevant. But we've got a 2 scheme, 2 attack, 6 health minion with, after the engaged hero generates any number of resources, deal an equal amount of damage to that hero. Knowing Spider's gameplay, I think that this is relevant. You need to take out this minion before you really do a lot of playing cards. And if you can't take this out without playing a lot of cards, then it's going to deal a lot of damage to you. So in that form, it is reasonably disruptive, which puts it at number 42. Next up, number 41, we have the Viper, who is a Hydra agent. Spider-Woman's backstory is so wrapped up in, she got her powers from, if I'm remembering correctly, she got her powers from a Hydra experiment when she was a child. She is constantly wrapped up in, is she a double agent? Is she a triple agent? She's interwoven with Hydra in such a way that the Viper makes sense. That said, I have limited experience with Spider-Woman, but I don't feel like she's that disruptive. So she gets a strong 4 in flavor and thematics, a 2 in disruptiveness. 2/2 with 5 health. While the Viper's engaged with you, your hand size is reduced by 1. My memory does not put the Viper as that disruptive, which leaves her at number 41. And wrapping up the first chunk of this list, getting to number 40, we're looking at Hawkeye's Nemesis, Crossfire. Thematically, I get it. Disruptively, it's kind of so-so. So in terms of what you would know about Hawkeye, he shoots bow good. Crossfire has really good aim. I think the only reason why this isn't Bullseye is because I don't really feel like Hawkeye has really done much interaction with Bullseye, aside from when Bullseye pretended to be Hawkeye in the Dark Avengers. So Crossfire makes sense. He's got 1 scheme, he's got 2 attack, 4 health, he's a quick strike, and his attacks gain piercing. I don't know that the piercing's that relevant, but I do think that he is a reasonable body that's not that disruptive, which leaves him at number 40 for me. Next up, we have number 39, Groot's Nemesis, Furnax, which I might be rating this fairly high, but in my knowledge of this character is that I don't know if this is a specific character or if this is more of like a race of aliens, but they feed on Groot's race, the fungal titans or something. I'm blanking on what Groot's actual like race is called on his planet. For being so low on the list, I do feel like this is a fairly middle of the road decent call in terms of thematics and in terms of disruptiveness. I do think this is like a solid 3 and 3. You got 2 scheme, 2 attack, 6 health, Leviathan minion, and it has the force response of when Furnax activates, deal 2 indirect damage to each player. So I do feel like this is going to chip away at, could potentially chip away at Groot's growth counters. I think this could be a speed bump for many heroes. This could be a speed bump. I think this is a counterplay to Groot enough that I think that it is more than a speed bump, and I think that leaves him at a reasonable minion. The higher we have the list, the more it feels like an absolute flavor home run, and so it's oddly enough, the middling kind of leaves you at a very low point on the list. Next up, we have Jubilee and Nanny at number 38. And I feel like this was a surprise. I don't know that I necessarily understood the relationship between Jubilee and Nanny, but having looked into it since the pack has come out, I've realized that Nanny and Jubilee's first appearances, well, okay, Nanny's first appearance is not with Jubilee, but Jubilee's first appearance is tied into Nanny. So much so that I do feel like she is disruptive. She is actually flavorfully relevant. But 1 attack, 2 scheme, 4 health. She has toughness, and after Nanny attacks you, if you control 1 or more allies, search the encounter deck, discard pile, and set aside area for a copy of Lost Child and reveal it. And with Lost Child just being a attachment that turns an ally into a minion, I do think that this is disruptive enough that she does hit that 3/3, feels good for me. Next up, at number 37, we have Psylocke and Chimera, which this makes sense to me. I wouldn't necessarily say that Psylocke and the Marauders are strongly linked. Psylocke she is part of the Mutant Massacre where we first see the Marauders. But I do think that Chimera is, one, they do have a connection that I think is a 3 out of 5. And I do think that she is reasonably disruptive. She cares about the number of mental resources on your the cards in front of you, which Psylocke it could be hit or miss. Psylocke could have a lot of them in play, or she might be using her swords, which means she's going to be having the strength resource on them, and it's not going to be that effect is going to be a little bit tempered. But I do think that just in terms of handling Chimera, she is something that, with a lot of these minions, with a lot of these Nemesis, when they come down, they might just be like, I need to just ignore them because I'm about to take the villain out. But if you are in that point where you can't take the villain out and the scenario soon, I think that she is a minion that you're going to need to put some effort into, and so she is reasonably disruptive. Clocking in at number 36, we have Domino and Topaz. This is another one where I get what they were going for. And I do see that there is a connection between these two. I think the problem is that within Domino's comic book history, I don't know that she's really accrued that many nemesis. She's so tied into Six Pack and she's so tied into X-Force that her enemies are kind of more of the enemies of the groups she's a part of. But Topaz and Prototype, kind of as a duo, do represent Domino's past history enough that it's not completely off the beaten path. That said, both of these characters, if I understand correctly, are in approximately 6 comics, and they're very recent. And so if you are a fan of Domino, this does seem like a logical choice. But seeing as Domino has been in 1 movie, I think the major population is not going to know who Domino really is outside of this game. Your knowledge is then going to be restricted to what has she done in her own solo comics, and so that's kind of what Fantasy Flight has to go off of, is what has she done recently. And once again, Topaz is kind of the nemesis in those comic books, who's kind of aiding the character that we know as Prototype into doing more and more. So once again, reasonably disruptive, reasonably flavorful, gets you at number 36. Moving on to number 35, we have Spectrum's nemesis, Radioactive Man. Kind of all the same things I already said. Spectrum has such a wide history. She's been around, I want to say, since the 80s. Maybe even it was the late 70s. So she's got a lot of history. I don't know that her history really interacts with Radioactive Man that much, but in terms of this game, I understand why they made that choice. Her powers, her energy signatures, her energy forms, plus Radioactive Man, those two do seem like they would be butting heads. His ability, which I'm blanking on right now, not that one. Oh, sorry, she came out in the other wave. I was like, what the heck? How is he not elite? Okay, so 1 scheme, 1 attack, 6 health. After Radioactive Man activates against you, deal 1 damage to each character you control. He is going to be a bit of a pain. Most people go down to Alter Ego to recover. When Radioactive Man is in the ballpark and you need to consider him, granted, you never know when Shadow of the Past is going to come up, but if you're playing Standard 3, you have a bit of an idea of, okay, we're getting close, my minion might come out. So you have reason to believe that this might come out, then you need to be keeping your health at a certain level. Whether that's 2 or 3, just so that damage plus that extra damage from Radioactive Man doesn't take you out. He could also be taking out any weak minions you have, and that's going to be a real pain. At least at the same level of disruption with 3 and 3 for me. Moving forward, we have... Where are you? Of course, why would Beetle be an elite minion? Fantasy Flight, can we please just make all Nemesis elite? I want that, and at the same time I don't want that, because then there are certain things you can't do. Okay, so Beetle, being a 1 scheme, 1 attack, 4 health, guard minion, I already feel like that is reasonably disruptive. For Wasp, it's not the biggest deal, because she can spread her damage. You can both attack and still get some damage over to the villain with no problem. But I do think that outside of putting a pretty heavy augmentation on, 4 damage outright for Wasp is not the easiest thing in the world. I do believe that she has an attack event that obviously I think deals 5. So it is possible that in your kit you're going to be able to do this. But when defeated, choose to either spend a physical resource or shuffle Beetle into the encounter deck. So she might be coming back very quickly. And then that's kind of what keeps her at a persistent enough threat that once we were looking at all the ties, I wanted to put her above some of the ones we've already looked at. And like I said, that leaves her at number 34. Moving on to number 33, we've got Miss Marvel's Nemesis, Thomas Edison. Whew, this is a wild one. This is a wild one. So in my mind, this is kind of a two-parter because, oh gosh, is it? How does the other one, the Edison's giant robot, comes into play? Is that something you just naturally have to pull off? Maybe it is, and I'm just misremembering. Okay, I don't know why I thought that. Either way, so Thomas Edison makes sense within the confines of the comics. He is actually someone who goes up against Miss Marvel. But Miss Marvel has not been around so long that you can really say like, oh, well, her nemesis is this or her nemesis is that. What really sells him for me is that he is definitively a Miss Marvel antagonist. And the fact that he cannot take damage while you're engaged with another minion is disruptive enough that, once again, I wanted to put him above some of the other minions, and thus he is at number 33. Number 32 is Vision with Ultron. And this one, I am open to say that I may have judged this lower. There's a lot of minions, and like I said, the list fills up fast, and suddenly things end up on the bottom quicker than you would imagine. Ultron being a 2-scheme, 2-attack, 6 health minion with elite and toughness, and he basically does what the villain does, where he creates Ultron drones, and I believe his side scheme is his side scheme. So yeah, his Vision's Nemesis kit does a job of like, okay, I'm gonna get out Ultron, I'm gonna get out the side scheme. The side scheme's going to create a bunch of drones for you, and the drones are going to have this property. Either way, this is a flavor home run for me. This is a solid 5. I do feel like for Vision, this is not that disruptive. Either you are set up in such a way that he's not dealing that much damage to you, so you can just let him sit, or he's making drones that also, if you're in your not your dense form, your other form that basically reduces the amount of damage you take. Like, this does not feel disruptive to me for Vision, and maybe there are players out there who play Vision a lot that say, well, actually, like, Ultron is very disruptive. But to me, just looking at it on paper, trying to give it a stat, I do feel like tied with our next one for in terms of score, but I rated number 31 Black Panther's Nemesis Killmonger just a little bit higher. Once again, a little bit more nuanced. So Killmonger absolutely makes sense. 5 out of 5 right there. Killmonger is only disruptive in the fact that he cannot take damage from Black Panther upgrades. But Black Panther has so many other ways to deal damage that I actually feel like he's kind of a pushover, which just leaves him at number 31. Moving on to the top 30, we get to number 30, Iceman and Pyro. So, flavorfully, I get this. If you know these characters only from the movies, makes sense. You got Ice Boy against Fire Boy. They're diametrically opposed. The X-Men villains are a little bit harder because, especially throughout the 2000s, villains are jumping the line between hero and villain a lot. So Pyro and Iceman have both been on the same team. They were both on the Marauders during Krakoa. But at the same time, I get it. It's not a perfect, it's not a 5 out of 5, but it is a 4 out of 5. And I do think that the indirect damage coming from Pyro is disruptive enough that you can brush off some of the damage he's dealing, but you can't just sacrifice a minion to the damage. You're going to get some of that overflow. And I do think that is disruptive enough that it does play a part. Next up, we've got number 29, our newest hero, Magneto with Exodus, a 2-scheme, 2-attack, 6 health, Acolyte Elite Psionic minion with steady toughness and villainous, and the force ability when Exodus attacks you, discard top card of your deck, discard cards off the top of your deck equal to his total attack. Because he has villainous, that's where I feel like he really comes into his own for me, and why he gets a disruptive score of 4 out of 5. I think in terms of flavor, I understand where they're coming from, and they're not going to make Professor X the Nemesis. That would have been funny, but I don't think that was something that came to my mind, but I don't think that would have ever been a serious consideration. I do feel like maybe one of the other acolytes would have been better, but I don't know if they would have been as powerful as Exodus. So they might have gotten a 4 out of 5 in flavor, whereas I'm giving him a 3 out of 5 in flavor. I think this is a stronger Nemesis, gets a higher score than Fabian Cortez would have, but I do feel like it has its pluses and minuses, which leaves Exodus at number 29 on our list. Moving on, we're getting up to Trevor Fitzroy from the. We're moving on to Trevor Fitzroy at number 28, Nemesis to Bishop. Honestly, this is pretty cut and dry for me. He is thematically, he makes sense, and maybe I should have even rated him higher. I gave him 4 out of 5. Maybe he is the perfect Nemesis for Bishop, but I wasn't feeling it when I was making my ratings, which is, once again, this is all subjective. But in terms of his ability, Quick Strike, and when he attacks and defeats an ally, if Portal Through Time is in play, place 2 threat on it, otherwise find and reveal it. So he's going to go get that side scheme if he defeats an ally. The Quick Strike and 3 attack is strong enough for me, but I do think that, like, just recurring his side scheme, or just making his side scheme more relevant, pushed it up, made it so that I viewed him above Exodus, but still below some of the other cards we're about to talk about. Next up at number 27, we have Belladonna from the Nemesis for Gambit. Once again, kind of the same thing. I understand where they're coming from. I do feel like if we really plumbed through Gambit's history, there may have been better Nemesis, but this is a pretty good one, which is why, you know, it gets 4 out of 5 for me. In terms of disruptiveness, I do feel like she is not that disruptive, which, I mean, was why she gets 3 out of 5 for me. But let's see, what was her card again? Okay, yeah, so Quick Strike, Toughness, she has 3 attack and 5 health. And after Belladonna attacks and defeats a character, place 2 threat on the main scheme. So that's the part that kind of made me want to put her higher than Trevor Fitzroy is. Trevor Fitzroy is affecting his side scheme. This is affecting the main scheme. With the assassin theme that comes out of this pack, I do feel like she is disruptive enough that she still reaches the total that she does, but I feel like she's disruptive in a way that is more disruptive than Trevor Fitzroy. Next up, at number 26, we have Storm Nemesis Callisto. Quick Strike and 3 attack is like the weird theme that they got into with the mutant wave. It's like, if it has Quick Strike, it's going to also have 3 attack. We need to make that count. And her getting a tough status whenever Knife Fight comes into play, it's only 2 cards in the pack. It's only going to come up so often, but also the side scheme does call for Knife Fight, which means that there's a reasonable chance that Knife Fight's going to come into play. Now the question is Knife Fight going to be relevant before you get through that 5 health? And that's between you and God to figure out. But either way, she is also one of those ones when this could have been 4.5 in terms of flavor. Depending on what X-Men fan you talk to, Shadow King may have been the more appropriate one. I do think that her and Storm fighting in the Morlock sewers does give her a lot of credit, but I don't know. I could have seen Shadow King as her nemesis and been fine with that. And as we move into number 25, we have Wolverine's nemesis, Omega Red. This is... Oh no, we're still in the giant group of Tide. Okay, so Omega Red is a 1 scheme 2 attack minion with 8 health with Retaliate and Steady. When Omega Red attacks you, deal 1 damage to each character you control. So very similar to Radioactive Man. The thing that really puts him head and shoulders above everything else is that for Wolverine, I think he is more thematic than a character like Radioactive Man. I feel like he is disruptive. I feel like that Retaliate is definitely going to come into effect because, first of all, you can't keep him down, but he has 8 health. Wolverine is not getting through Omega Red in one attack, in my opinion. It's just not going to happen. And high enough above everybody else to put him right at number 25 as we've gotten over the hill. We are now moving into the top half of the villains, or the Nemesis. I suppose we've actually kind of been in the top half for a little bit here, but either way, Omega Red definitively at number 25 for me. Moving in to the top 24, we've got number 24, which is Mr. Sinister, aka Cyclops' minion. And he ranks this high, one, because I think the flavor is on point, and similarly, his disruption is also, I think, something to be considered, but I feel like I considered him higher above some of the other ones we talked about because he has a boost icon. I think he might be one of the very few minions that has a boost icon, or a boost ability where does anything if he's just revealed, and in this case you're stunned, and if you're already stunned you take 2 damage. But overall, stalwart, toughness, and villainous on a 6 health minion is pretty good, and I'll say that thematically he makes sense. Disruptively, I guess we're kind of in a similar space to Wolverine. Their minion are powerful enough that you might not necessarily make it through all the way, but he doesn't have Retaliate, but he does have villainous, and these factors all come together that as I was sort of, massaging all the numbers, he came out above some of the other ones, and that boost ability was really what I think took him up that next level. Moving on to number 23, we have the Juggernaut with 1 scheme, 4 attack, and 8 health. He also has stalwart and toughness, and then a boost ability that if this activation is an attack, it gains overkill and piercing. That feels maybe not more relevant than the stun, but that feels extremely relevant. Put on top of that the fact that he's got 8 health and toughness, that means that you are dealing 9+ damage just to get rid of this 4 attack minion. All the more reason why maybe his maybe I could take him up an entire level. I don't know, in my mind I don't know if that is for Colossus. I think the fact that his piercing ability on his boost ability could take out all of his tough statuses is one thing. I think once Juggernaut's on the field, Colossus can take care of him reasonably well, that I don't feel like for him as a hero, he's himself that disruptive. But I think just bringing the whole package together, I do rate him above Mr. Sinister. Next, we're moving on to Nova and Warbringer at number 22. This one I'm a little less aware of. I won't pretend like I know a whole bunch about Nova. He is also sort of in that same Guardians of the Galaxy kind of world where once he's in the cosmic, I know less about him. But my understanding, having read a little bit of the backstory, I felt like he was flavorfully relevant, at least in terms of a 3 out of 5. But then as disruptive, paired against Nova, I feel like this is disruptive. This is more disruptive enough to be a 3. 1 scheme, 3 attack, 5 health, 4 stability. When Warbringer attacks you, he gets +1 attack for this attack for each card with a printed wild resource in your hand. That attack gains overkill. In my mind, he could really just wreck the battlefield for you, and so that does mean that he is one of the... No, there's been other minions that have scored a high disruption, giving him a disruption of 4 out of 5, in my opinion. And so really the thing keeping him out of just skyrocketing into the top 10 is just the fact that I don't know enough about him to say that I feel like he is thematically relevant. Moving on to number 21, we have Ghost Spider and the Lizard. So her Peter Parker is the Lizard. Flavor-wise, this is pretty close to a home run for me. A 4 disruption. I put it a 3, just because looking at what he can do, where when he comes into play, or force interrupt when the villain phase begins, he heals the damage. I don't know if that changes a whole lot, but if you're not paying attention to him, you know, a 2-turn clock to get rid of him could get expanded out if you're just not prioritizing that right. I don't feel like that's disruptive enough, but I do feel like that this is a minion that might be in play for 2 turns, he might be in play for 3 turns, depending on how much you're letting him heal back some damage. And that regeneration is kind of what kept him on the higher end as I was kind of assessing everything. Next up at number 20, we have She-Hulk and Titania. So this is one where I feel like they're grouped together. They're thematically relevant in the fact that Titania and She-Hulk are both very strong characters. They're very brutish in that way. It would make sense that they're tied together. I think that her having pretty substantially high hit points to the point where her attack can be very strong is another reason why I felt like she was moderately disruptive to what She-Hulk was trying to do. She-Hulk has a lot of health, and I think that she gets a Nemesis that has that can have a lot of attack power, and so you are kind of on a razor's edge. If you don't deal damage to her right away and you just let her attack for 6, that can be a very bad thing. But She-Hulk has a lot of health, so you can sort of mitigate that a little bit. You're a little less concerned. Next up, we've got Peter Parker and the Vulture. And this was a rough one for me because I understand why this is his nemesis. And why I gave him a 4 out of 5 when you know you pull everything back. While I would have loved to have seen Green Goblin or Doc Ock be his nemesis, I feel like they were holding those back to be actual scenarios, and then when they got around to a Spider-Man box, they unfortunately just didn't give Doc Ock his own standalone villain scenario, which is a little bit of a setback. I've been critical before to say that Vulture I just thought was kind of a miss. I've come back around. I think that he is disruptive in the fact that flavorfully, thematically, I think he's solid enough. 4 out of 5. I think disruptively, Spider-Man can handle him, which is why I feel like the Quick Strike is not the biggest deal in the world, but he is still something to keep consideration, because 3-attack Quick Strike can get out of hand. But we've seen that time and time again already throughout this video. The 4 health, I think, is what kind of holds him back and makes it so that he's not a 4 out of 4 disruptiveness. He can be very easily handled. You just need to have the tools in place to kind of dodge or soak his initial attack. We've got at number 18, we've got Venom with the Enraged Symbiote. Now, I think what's important here, and I originally had this lower because I didn't feel like it was really that much to write home about. And then I remembered that thematically, I think for Agent Venom, it's been a while since I've read that run. I think that you could have sold me on other minions. I think just generic symbiotes is a little weak, but this gets a lot of points and rises up into the top 20 to number 18 because the disruptive part of this is not the symbiote, it's the multiple symbiotes, to the fact that, let's see here. I was just playing with him, which is why I thought about this. Yeah, 4 symbiotes that all have guard and patrol. That's the disruptive part. It's not the one body, it's the number of bodies you have to worry about. And so if you don't have spread damage, Venom is very good at a lot of things. But at least in terms of my experience, this is not a minion that you clear in one turn. You have to make a concerted effort, and you need to basically take them out one by one over the course of 2, maybe 3 turns. And those are turns you're not attacking the villain, which is why he gets more disruptive points for me. And like I said, moves into the top 20. Next up, we've got Nightcrawler with Azazel. Azazel at number 17. Nightcrawler's Nemesis. Flavorfully, this is spot on. 3 attack, 2 scheme, 3 health, quick strike, and cannot have upgrades attached. So you can't attach the BAMF, and any multiplayer, there's other things you can't attach to him. And then a boost ability, which once again helps to raise him up, in my opinion. It's very on point, but I also think is reasonably tempered. This could be a lot worse. But overall, what's really helping here is that this is just a flavor home run. Moving on to number 16, we have Belasco, the Nemesis for Magic. Once again, I think this is a flavor home run. This is a 5 out of 5. Where is Belasco? Belasco is right here. Okay, so 1 scheme, 1 attack, 6th health. Villainous, that's a strong thing for him. And then the Force Interrupt. After Belasco activates against you, discard the top 3 cards of your deck. If Ruler of Limbo is in play, attach those cards to it face down. Because Magic cares so much about the top of the deck, this is where some of the disruption comes into play. Not enough for me to really say that I thought this was a 4 out of 5, but I did think that the flavor and the disruption combined bring him to a solid number 16 for me. All right, moving on to number 15. Wow, we're already number 15. We have Strife, aka the Nemesis for Cable. Kind of the same story. I think this is a flavor home run. Kind of went back and forth a lot on this. So 2 attack, 2 scheme, 2 attack, Villainous, 5 health. And when a player plays a psionic event, cancel the effects of that event and deal 1 damage to Strife. I really wanted to give him 4 points in disruptiveness, but then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, like, for Cable, and see, this is why I keep waffling. When he first comes out, Cable is kind of one-on-one with Strife, and Cable has a lot of psionic events in his own kit. But I feel like if you are in a position where you're fighting Strife, I think it's reasonable to say that you can get around the psionic event. Maybe you sacrifice the psionic event to deal damage to him, but then that remaining 4 damage is something that you should be able to handle with something that fits outside of that. When it comes down to just mono-a-mono Cable against Strife, I feel like he is disruptive, but not so disruptive to really kind of go that extra mile. Moving on to number 14, we have Mystique, a 1 scheme, 1 attack, 6 health elite minion with toughness and villainous. Again, I talked about this when I did the Rogue pack. Could be worse. Could be her actual minion out of her own modular encounter set, but that you see in the Sabretooth encounter. But then the Force response after Mystique engages you, search the encounter deck. Search the encounter deck, discard pile, and set aside area for a copy of Misled Treachery and shuffle it into your deck. So she is going to be putting treacheries into your deck. But at the end of the day, I feel like what makes her disruptive is just the fact that she has toughness and 6 health. I think it's reasonable to say that Rogue should be able to just knock that tough off and then just do a 1-2 punch to get rid of her. But that doesn't mean that she's not a distraction from what's going on. She's not just... I think she is enough of a distraction that you don't want to just leave her sitting there. One, because she has Villainous, so her attack is going to vary wildly depending on what's going on, but also just because I think that she is a reasonable threat that you want to address. Okay, moving on to number 13. This was a hard one. I wanted to put her higher, and in comparing the two, I felt like she just didn't stack up the same, but number 13 is Nebula and her Nemesis Gamora. This is a 5 out of 5 in terms of flavor. I feel like just when you're comparing the two, oh shoot, Gamora is where? Gamora is right here. Okay, so 2 scheme, 2 attack, 6 health. When this minion would enter play, discard the Gamora ally in play. And the Force response after Gamora attacks and damages you, choose and discard an upgrade you control. This counteracts what Gamora is trying to, or this counteracts what Nebula is trying to do. But I feel like the times I've played Nebula, it's fair to say you are trying to navigate how you're using up your upgrades. What are they called? Your techniques. It is fair to say that you are trying to navigate how you're using your techniques so that you have what you need and you're ready to just kind of use them all up at the right time. But I feel like that is not counteracted that much by Gamora. If you are an alter ego when Gamora comes out, yes, you lose your Gamora ally, but you still have time to coordinate. If I'm going to take damage from Gamora, what upgrades am I going to lose? And you might have enough of a plan that it slows down what you're going to do, but you might be able to get rid of Gamora before she deals damage to you. If she had Quick Strike, that would absolutely bump her up to a 4 out of 5, put her neck and neck with the actual Gamora hero. But as of right now, I feel like this is one where I could be very easily persuaded that I'm underrating how disruptive she is. But in my mind, she is a flavor home run, and she is just not disruptive enough to make it all the way into the top 10 for me. Looking at our number 12, we have Abomination with Hulk. This, unless you were talking about the amount of the amount of attack on a character, this might be the highest that Hulk has ever been. So Abomination is a 2-scheme, 3-attack minion with 6 health, and the forced response after after Abomination attacks you, discard the top card of your deck. If a strength icon resource was discarded this way, take 2 damage. Hulk has a lot of health. That 2 damage is not that big of a deal. And I think it's reasonable to say that when you're playing Hulk, you're going to have allies, because you need some way to be thwarting. Unless you are just going, okay, I guess, unless you pull Abomination like on the second turn, if you're in a rush strategy, this does not stop you. So it is reasonable to say that the 3 attack is its own thing, but you're probably going to have allies that are gonna buffer that. The big problem here is going to be the fact that you're very likely going to hit a strength resource. 2 damage is probably going to hit you every time Abomination attacks, but I don't think he's disruptive enough, because I don't think the 3 attack is actually going to hit you as often as you might think it is. As we make our way through all these ones that are flavor home run, 5 points in thematics, 3 points in disruptiveness, you know, this could be higher or lower than some of the ones we've just talked about, ranging from Nightcrawler all the way to Hulk. But to me, I feel like he sits at a number 12, because I do think there is you need to use some brain cells here. And last but not least, everything before the top 10. Let's talk about Doctor Strange and Baron Mordo. So what gets me here, and first of all, flavor home run, and why I think that he is a disruptive 3, but not that disruptive, is obviously 2 attack, 2 scheme, 5 health. Force interrupt when Baron Mordo attacks, discard the top card of your deck. If that card's printed resource has a fist resource, has a strength resource, you are stunned. Energy resource, take 2 damage. Mental resource, you are confused, and all of the above if you hit a wild resource. Unless I'm misremembering how Doctor Strange normally operates, he is so enraptured in his Invocation deck. I think it is fair to say that no matter what happens to you here, that's not stopping you. It's annoying, and you certainly want to get rid of it just so that you're not repeatedly getting stunned or confused or whatever, but like your Invocation deck is going to be doing so much work for you that this is more of just kind of like a petty squabble, which is what keeps Baron Mordo out of the top 10. Alright, and we've made it to the top 10 Nemesises, in my opinion. This is a definitive list, and it shall not be questioned. Number 10 is Shadowcat's nemesis, Emma Frost. And this one, I felt like, was about as close to being a 5 out of 5 as you can get without being a 5 out of 5. Shadowcat absolutely has a problem with Emma Frost. I just didn't think it was strong enough to be a 5. And on the flip side, she is extremely disruptive, to the point of she is disruptive to everything. She is disruptive to discussions about her and the understanding of how this card works. She is disruptive to just common decency, because it's not even the villainous. It's not even the health. It is, while White Queen is engaged with you, you are confused. So that means that as long as she's engaged with you, you are confused. Once you get rid of her, you've got to clear that confused status, and I think that is enough to make her one of the most disruptive heroes that still is soft to a lot of things. Because the thing is that she doesn't have guard. You don't have to take care of her right away. If you're not worried about thwarting, you don't have to worry about her. You should worry about her. You should get rid of her at some point, because you don't want to be caught in a place where you need to basically thwart twice when all is lost. You do want to get rid of her at some point, but I do feel like she is just barely soft enough that she's not disrupting everything. So she is top 10, just barely squeaked out being, you know, one of the most perfect Nemesises out there. Lastly, these two were tied. Looking at Baron Mordo, who is a 1 scheme, 3 attack, 5 health minion with quick strike. And while Baron Mordo is engaged with you, you cannot thwart. So for Captain America, I feel like this is not a big deal. Getting 5 damage with Captain America does not seem like it is asking too much. It might take an event and an attack from him, but he can ready right back up. He's solid there. So Baron Zemo, I've been saying Baron Mordo this whole time. Baron Zemo, I think, is just about perfect. Obviously, Red Skull would be the perfect thematic nemesis for him. They just weren't going to go in that direction. Baron Zemo is just about as perfect and is just precisely just shy of extremely disruptive. He's, like I said, 4 out of 5. And that moves us to the neck and neck race here, where I had to sit here and really kind of massage these numbers as much as possible, because this top 8 was very contentious. So number 8 is the Green Gobbler, a 1 scheme, 2 attack minion with 4 health, and the force response after the Green Gobbler engages you, discard all counters on each card you control. Spider-Ham really loves to have his cartoon counters, and so with Spider-Ham not having a huge history, I did give him a 4 for thematics. I could be influenced to believe that maybe he is a 5 for thematics, but I felt like he was a 4 out of 5 for thematics, but a 5 out of 5 for disruption. This is a 9 out of 10 Nemesis for a 10 out of 10 hero. It is very perfect. And I say that just because he can make other heroes like War Machine has ammo counters. He is so perfectly attuned to his hero that he can just completely take the wind out of the sails of what Spider-Ham is trying to do. Next up, we've got number 7. Once again, I think there's a lot of people who this might have been one that came to your mind. And once again, like Hulk, this might be the highest that Valkyrie ever scores on certain lists. But her Nemesis, the Enchantress, is one of those ones where I couldn't give it a 5 out of 5. I think it's probably very close. Once again, like Domino, Valkyrie is a hero that I feel like is more associated with teams than she is solo. So it's hard to say like what villains are really like her nemesis versus kind of like just they're both Asgardians, so they're tied together that way. So that gave her a 4 out of 5. But she is disruptive as all get out. Going and grabbing a copy of The Seduced, just, that is just too much. And so, of this list, the Green Gobbler and Enchantress were the 4 thematic, 5 disruptive ones that were tied at the score of 20. So all these other ones are 5s and 4s. And it really came down to just this top 6 really just came down to how I was feeling about each one of them. And so take it or leave it here. But number 6 is Harpoon with Angel. This makes sense. Harpoon's the one that took Angel's wings in the Morlock sewers in the comics. So he's a 5 out of 5 there. And disruptive, once again, I don't think he's as disruptive as someone like Enchantress or the Green Gobbler, but the way that he's built is disruptive enough that he gets the number 6 spot. Not too much more to say about it. Just it was a good pick. It's a pretty perfect pick, and he is a reasonably hard minion to take on. Unless I'm missing something about Angel, I feel like Angel, he's not like extremely well equipped to take care of him. He is kind of more than just a speed bump. Next up, we've got at number 5, Miles Morales and his nemesis, the Prowler. Again, chef's kiss, perfect. Giving him Stalwart is notable, which means that you're not going to like slow him down. And when revealed, if you're on alter ego form, give Prowler a tough status. Again, Miles wants to be an alter ego quite a bit, so it's a reasonable chance that he's going to come into play. He's going to have that tough counter. He's going to have 5 health. But he counteracts what Miles wants to do. Miles is so about his special abilities. It's funny, like, I don't want to go up against Thanos because Thanos counteracts what Miles wants to do so much. Prowler is his nemesis and takes him down a notch. And I feel like he is very well tuned to be his nemesis. I think if he came in with a tough status, it would be stronger. It might not be as thematic. I like the thematics here where he gets it because you're an alter ego form, so he's preying on your alter ego. Prowler is Miles Morales' uncle in the comics, so he does have that connection to his alter ego, and like I said, perfect, just about perfect nemesis. Moving on to our number 4, we got Gamora and Nebula. So Nebula being a 1 scheme 2 attack 5 health minion with Retaliate 2, and the force ability, when this minion comes into play, you get rid of the Nebula ally. I think this really comes down to just the fact that she gets 5 out of 5 for theme, 4 out of 5 for disruptiveness, simply because Retaliate 2 is just, well, first of all, it's twice as strong as Retaliate 1. And I think that outside of the kit, Gamora has the ability to deal 5 damage. But I think when you're just looking at what Nebula baseline can do, 5 hit points is enough to make it 2 attacks. And so that means you're going to get the Retaliate 2. And I feel that is just disruptive enough to put her in the top 10, where the Gamora minion didn't. And like I said, this is about as perfect as it can be. I think if you told somebody there was going to be a nemesis for every hero, people would know instantly that Gamora was going to have Nebula. And our last of the minions with 20 points in total, Thor's nemesis Loki. And I think this probably could have been lower. Obviously, perfect chef's kiss in terms of theme. It's reasonable to say that this is he should have gotten like a high 3. But I think the fact that Loki can come back, you can deal all the damage you want to him and he'll just drop it all off, is relevant. Thor against Juggernaut, you don't want to hit Shadows of the Past. You don't want to get Loki because so much of that scenario, that encounter deck, is treacheries. So there's a reasonable chance that against some villains, Loki's never going to go away. And he is enough of a pain in your side that when it came time to really decide how we were going to stack up these last couple of heroes, Loki for me came as the creme de la creme. Okay, and then our top 2. And this was almost completely out of notoriety. So number 2 is Adam Warlock and the Magus. I think these are perfect. It all makes sense. He is the dark version of Adam Warlock. He is a 2 scheme 2 attack minion with 5 health. He has quick strike, he has toughness, and after he activates, you discard the top 5 cards of your deck. In terms of what Adam Warlock wants to do, I felt like this was spot on. Quick striking, even a 2 quick strike, is still relevant. I don't know that anytime I've played Adam Warlock, I haven't been in hero form. I feel like he just never goes to alter ego, and maybe I'm just misremembering, or maybe I'm playing him wrong. But then that toughness, that 5 health, I also feel like 5 health is relevant because my recollection of playing Adam Warlock is he himself is defined by the cards in his kit. He himself is not going to be able to get through the Magus that easily. And I think in combination with, is it Regeneration? Like, well, that's his obligation. In combination with his side scheme, excuse me, hey, can we stop? In combination with his side scheme, I think that milling your deck and worrying about your side scheme, because when your side scheme, the side scheme is as such that when your deck resets, you exhaust your identity and stun it. I think the combination of those two coming into play, he quick strikes, so he's going to attack you. He's gonna mill 5 cards off the top of your deck. That's all going to happen, and you are putting yourself at a point where you move through your deck quick enough. I think you are going to very quickly find yourself exhausted and stunned, and so I do think that he is a perfect 5 for 5 in terms of disruptiveness. And of course, that leaves us with only one other minion, and I feel like this is probably the one that everybody knew. If it wasn't going to be in the top 10, I was crazy, and I think that is easily the number one, and that is Dark Phoenix, aka Jean Grey, Phoenix's nemesis. This is perfect design. She is a 2-scheme, 2-attack, 12 hit point minion with steady, toughness, and villainous. And when Dark Phoenix schemes, she places that threat onto Consume the World if able, and when revealed, you go and find the Consume the World side scheme. So she is the only nemesis that also introduces an alternate loss condition. And in terms of just like, she is the perfect 5 out of 5 design, perfect 5 out of 5 flavor, and 5 out of 5 disruptiveness. I think you can any minion can be, any nemesis minion can be discounted by the fact that it's like, well, if I'm late enough into the game, I'm just going to ignore her. That is fair. Short of guard, that is fair. But in terms of like just what she's able to do, I think she is the top tier, most perfect nemesis minion. She's exactly what you would think of when you say there's going to be a nemesis minion. Right up there with Thor and Loki, right up there with Nebula and Gamora. Even right up there with Miles and the Prowler. Like, it all makes sense. From an outside perspective, anybody who's new to the game is going to know this. And I think that she is the number one nemesis in the game right now. And I'll be shocked if they ever top her in some ways. But after a long series of recordings, we have reached the end. And so I want to know, what did I get wrong? What did I get right? What should have been higher? What do you think should have been lower? And I look forward to when we will be doing this all over again, just rating the side schemes. We're going to give me a little bit of time because this one's probably going to take a lot of energy out of me. But regardless, I thank you for your time. Please like and subscribe and do all those things. And I will catch you on the next one.